Peace. Welcome back, my people. This is going to be the first of two segments of this year's Black History Month Showcase, Introduction to Nile Valley Civilization, as it relates to the government and governing aspects of the Nile Valley. So, what we're going to be looking at and identifying today is the aspects of chiefless states, and then we're going to be jumping right into the African Constitution and the original fundamental rights of the African people. So the reason why we are identifying this is because when you look far back enough in history, what you see is on cartoons and visual aspects of anyone's thought process when it comes to Africa is wild wildebeests running from the alligator, or the wild Africans with the bone in their noses cooking up the missionaries in the pots. And Africans are often looked at as individuals who had no aspects of governance and no aspects of unification and harmony. So what we're going to do is we're going to look into the destruction of Black civilization by Chancellor Williams and into this specific topic. And we're going to identify once again why this is the furthest thing from the truth. I find myself saying that time and time again. So before we do that, we're going to keep things short and sweet. And we're going to open with a quote by the late and great ancestor Sheikh Anta Diop. And we're going to get right into the presentation. This is a pretty phenomenal quote, so listen carefully. The generation that followed did not have the same concerns. None of its members attempted to follow the example of the past generation. There was no longer anyone with notable determination to get to know the great men of the world, or if there were some individuals consumed with this curiosity, they were few in number. From then on, there remained only vulgar minds given over hatred, envy, and discord, who took an interest only in things which did not concern them: gossip, slander, calumny, and one's neighbors. All those things which are the source of the worst of our troubles. This speaks volumes to me because this actually is a very big reason as to why I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm a 28-year-old individual. I'm a father of two. I'm a plumber, and I do a lot of things in my pastime. But the way I see it, I don't see enough individuals and young men and women taking the initiative to dive into scholarship, to revive the past, and to tap into the aspect of Sankofa, the ancient Ghanaian aspect of reaching into our past and to bring into our future. And on that note, before I dive into the excerpt, I want to shout out my brethren Derek, my Ghanaian brethren, who really exemplifies this aspect of Sankofa. Okay, so what we're going to do, as I said, we're going to keep it short and sweet, and we're going to read a few excerpts out of this book over here before we get into the presentation. All right, so when you look at the chiefless states in this book, in between the pages 162 and 163, what you read is: the constitution of any people or nation, written or unwritten, derives from its customary rules of life, and that we now call democracy. And what we now call democracy was generally the earliest system throughout the ancient world. Among the blacks, democratic institutions evolved and functioned in a socio-economic and political system which Western writers call stateless societies, or societies without chiefs. When these societies were referred to as primitive democracies, the writers are in fact doing the very opposite of what they intended. Primitive also means the first, or the beginners. These facts are set forth at the outset because both the constitutional system and its offspring, African democracy, originated in chiefless societies, and, what is even more significant, democracy received its highest development here, where the people actually governed themselves without chiefs, where government was a way of life, and law and order were taken for granted. That comes out of page 163 specifically. Now, when you move on to page 169 to 70, you read in regards to the African Constitution: it was therefore in the societies without kings or chiefs where African democracy was born, and where the concept that people were sovereign was as natural as breathing. And this is why the traditional Africa, the rights of the individual never came before the rights of the community. You can't help but smile when you read these things. Imagine a world that we lived in today in 2022 where there was no selfishness, and I would not overlook the rights of my kinfolk and of the community over my own rights. Imagine that, right? Now, before we get into the visual, this is the last excerpt on page 170. These sovereign, self-governing people did not have a utopian society in any idealistic sense. Theirs was a practical society in every way. The laws were natural laws, and order and justice prevailed because the society could not otherwise survive. Theirs was, in fact, a government of the people. Theirs was, in fact, a government for the people. 175, The Destruction of Black Civilization, Great Issues of a Race, 45 BC to 2000 AD, Chancellor Williams. I give thanks for the scholarship of the ancestors. And now on that note, we are going into the visuals, and I'm going to show you something that I think that every household should have, every school should have at least access to, or people should be aware of. And what that is the original African Constitution and original fundamental rights of the African people. Let's do it. All right, page 170 of The Destruction of Black Civilization, Chancellor Williams. So as you can see here, what I brought before you are some of the political theories and principles of ancient African constitutional law and the fundamental rights of the African people. Now, as we can read at the bottom of the second paragraph, the actual all-African institutions that all Africans lost and of which their descendants do not have even a memory. One of the world's greatest constitutional systems was one of their tragic losses. Now, down below you read, drawn from African traditional constitutional and customary laws. Different versions and modifications of the same laws occurred in different societies. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through these constitution laws and fundamental rights. I'm not going to read every single one of them, but I will read the ones that stand out to me the most and the ones that I think you all need to hear. We'll start with the first two we see here. 1. The people are the first and final source of all power. 2. The rights of the community of people are, and of right ought to be, and right ought to be, superior to those of any individual, including chiefs and kings. The will of the people is the supreme law. Chiefs and kings are under the law, not above it. Big. Moving on. Number 3. Kings, chiefs, and elders are leaders, not rulers. They are elected representatives of the people and the instruments of executing their will. Keyword, the instruments, the vessel of executing their will. Number 5. The family is recognized as the primary social, judicial, economic, and political unity in the society. The family council may function as a court empowered to try all internal matters involving only members of the extended family group. Big. You can see just how much family is prominent. Without family, there's no society. We'll move down to 9. Each family, therefore, has a right to land, free of charge. Imagine that. sufficient in acreage for its economic well-being. For the right to the opportunity and means to make a living is the right to live. Now, for those of you who live in Toronto and where bungalows are going for 1.4 million, you can really understand how impactful this is. Imagine Doug Ford came and said, the right to a household is the right to live. Mind blown. Going down. The land, accordingly, cannot be sold or given away. The land may be held for life and passed on to the family's heirs, and so on forever. C. The chief is the custodian of a land, the principal duty being to assure fair distribution and actual base. None of this 4 or 3.5, inflation rate and none of that. Fair distribution. Moving on. Number 11. Every member of the state has the right of appeal from a lower to higher court. In some states, appeals can be taken even from a king's court to the mother nation. All right. Now going back up before we move to page 172. Number 4. Government and people are one and the same. I don't even think we could really fathom what that means, but as we mentioned before, sovereignty, it was a way of life and came as natural as breathing to these people. Moving on. What are we going to look at here? What is that? 14. The trouble of one is the trouble of all. No one may go in want while others have anything to give. All are brothers and sisters. Each is his brother or his sister's keeper. Now, what this reminds me is that quote from Tupac that we all should know. They have money for wars, but they can't feed the poor. That wasn't going on in pre-colonial and pre-dynastic Kemet. The needs of all are one and the same. They're unanimous. Now, moving on. 17. The community as a whole is conceived as one party. Opposition being conducted by leaders of various factions. Factions of opposition are usually formed by different age groups. 2. Debates may go on indefinitely or until a consensus is reached. Once a consensus is reached and the communities will determine, all open opposition to the common will must cease. Now, going up, what is that? 14. Royalty in African terms means royal worth, the highest in character, wisdom, sense of justice, and courage. He who founded the nation by uniting many as one must be the real leader, guide, and servant of his people. So, in contrary to what we might think a leader is today, the leader back then is actually the servant of his or her people. Now, going on, before we move on to the page, the people, in honor of the founder of the nation, thereafter will elect chiefs from the founder's family lineage. If the heirs meet the original test that reflected the founder's character, whose spirit was supposed to be inherited. Moving on, this is big in regards to warfare. This speaks volumes. Top one, what is that? 17. In warfare, the object is not to kill the enemy, but to overcome him with fear. If possible, such as screaming war cries, loud noise, hideously masked faces, etc. Where killing is unavoidable, it must be kept at a minimum. In case of defeat, there must be some kind of a ruse enabled to There must be some kind of ruse to enable the enemy to retire in honor. So this is where we get the origin of those big African masks that we all see. We always wonder what they were for. The idea of war was not to be dropping bombs. You weren't seeing Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You weren't seeing all those kind of splitting the atom. What the idea is to see is who can overcome the other party with the most fear and allow the other party to retreat in honor so that they can prevail. There was even an excerpt in a chapter in this book that spoke on the fact that there was even times where, just like in no man's land in the First World War, they would retire to the watering hole and crack jokes in between an intermission period of the conflict, and then they would go right back at it. Now, lastly over here is 21. The supreme command of the fighting forces is under the council, not the king. If the king becomes the commander-in-chief, it is through the election by the council because of his qualification as a general or field commander. This position ends with the war and the armed forces returned to a former status under the council, or more directly under the respective paramount chiefs. There were no standing armies. Now we should be at the part where we're looking at the fundamental rights. This is also phenomenal. Follow along with me. The following is a representative number of human rights, also drawn from customary laws or tradition constitutions. 1. The right to equal protection of the law. The right to a home. The right to aid in times of trouble. The right to reject the community's final decision on any matter and to withdraw from the community unmolested. The right of rebellion and withdrawal. 10. The right to family or community care in cases of sickness or accidents. 11. The right to special aid from chiefs in circumstances beyond the family's ability. 12. This is big. The right to a general education covering morals and good manners, family rights, responsibilities, kinship groups and social organization, neighborhoods, boundaries, farming, marketing, rapid mental calculation, and family, clan, tribal, and state histories. This was a fundamental right. There was no and, if, or buts. Every single man, woman, and child were granted this right, not a privilege. 13. The right to... Being a plumber, this one speaks volumes to me. Number 13. Every individual had the right to apprentice training for a useful vocation, which means every man, woman, and child growing up, every boy and girl growing up had the inherent fundamental right to choose an apprentice to pursue for a vocation for their own family. You can't make this stuff up. There's no going to the College of Trades. What do you qualify for? No, you're a human. This is your right. 14. The right to an inheritance as defined by custom. 15. The right to develop one's ability and exercise any developed skills. And in conclusion, the right to protect one's family and kinsmen even by violent means if becomes necessary and can be justified. Alright, last one, 18. The right of a man, even a slave, to rise to and occupy the highest positions in the state if he has the requisite ability and character. In conclusion, these constitutional principles and practices were held onto and carried by the migrating blacks to every part of the African continent. This fact is one of the most remarkable parts of the black man's story. Most remarkable because even those societies that sank to barbarism held on to the fundamental age after age as black man's story. Most remarkable because even those societies that sank to barbarism held on to the fundamentals age after age as though they were clutching the last threads of life itself. Even in Egypt, where the Asian and European impact was greatest, African constitutionalism could not be completely blotted out. 175, the African Constitution, Chancellor Williams. And on that note, we'll leave it there. So, now that we've gone over the African Constitution and the fundamental rights of African people, what we can say without reasonable doubt is that pre-colonial and pre-dynastic Africans were in no way, shape, or form running around boiling missionaries and boiling pots, absent of any kind of governance or government. What we can say is that, unfortunately, we've actually regressed. They were practicing some aspects of democracy that to this day we would consider unforeign. Imagine living in a world where we had the constitutional right to land, the constitutional right to govern ourselves, and that was as natural as breathing. These aspects of history are so profound that it would be an insult to not share with you. So, that is the first of two aspects of government that we're looking into. This next segment that's coming up is likely my favorite and likely going to be the one that I'm most excited about. And that one is the topic of matriarchy and the matrilineal origins of African civilization. Reason being is because being a man and being proud to be a man, I can honestly say that I'm aware of the whole macho patriarchy aspect of understanding manhood, and I hear that. But what no one wants to talk about is matriarchy. No one wants to talk about the African origin of matriarchy, so I'm here to do that. I'm here to bring it to light. I'm here to talk about Queen Zinga. I'm here to talk about Queen Candace, Queen Hatshepsut, Queen Tai, and we're going to go into it, and we're going to ruffle some feathers. This is going to be good. So that concludes this, and we will see you at matriarchy. You guys take care until then. Peace.
If Marcus Garvey step in read, then where some man a pray. Cause knowledge are the key and it we set the people free. And highly high philosophy is African unity. Who know what just segregation and social impurity. The race is not just for the swift, but those who can endure. Make sure you have a steady footing in a Zion door. And keep your thoughts pure. Your love is for the poor, but some little boy about